could dip close to freezing. Most places staying above this, but it is going to be quite fresh first thing tomorrow morning, and there could even be a few pockets of mist and fog around. But these will quite quickly clear. Once the sun gets up, it's going to burn any of those away, and it's also going to quite quickly lift our temperatures, so starting to turn increasingly warm as we go through the morning. Like I said though, there is that front towards the far northwest that could bring a bit more cloud and a few spots of rain to the northwest of Scotland, but otherwise a fine morning and a fine afternoon for most. Lots of sunshine on offer, lots of blue skies, and in that sunshine it's going to feel pretty warm for most. Temperatures, if anything, a few degrees warmer than today. We're likely to get to highs in the high teens, low 20s quite widely, and some places getting into the mid-20s Celsius. But do be aware, like I said, there's the risk of some thunderstorms pushing in from the southwest. These are going to arrive as we go through Saturday evening and become a bit more widespread as we go into Sunday. Bit of uncertainty at the moment as to how widespread they're going to be, so they could push across more parts of southern southwestern England into Wales, perhaps the Midlands and Northern Ireland as well. Otherwise, and there's actually a lot of dry, fine weather around as we go through Sunday and into Monday and Tuesday, but just a few showers to be aware of.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be the next big winner on the road in this brand new Alnag Baron 560 motorhome, courtesy of Marquis Leisure. Imagine the fun you could have in this luxurious home from home worth over £67,000. We'll also give you £5,000 in tax-free cash to make your next getaway a great one. And it could be all yours. For another chance to win the lot, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entry start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB13 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 6th of June. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is our country, and we think it's amazing. From high tea to the high street, we love it all. Even the rain, we like that too. There's nowhere else we'd rather be. That's why we're here to be the fearless champion of Britain, its voices and its values. Because we are GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching State of the Nation on GB News, right here with me, Matt Goodwin, on tonight's show. So at this time of remembrance, we honour those who fought for our freedom, yet the Labour peer Lord Glasman has warned that free speech in this country is being crushed. Working class voices are being silenced, they're being shamed. It's time to get a grip and defend the liberty our ancestors died to protect. We're going to be debating that tonight. And in new insane sentencing rules, convicted migrants could avoid deportation from this country. We're going to be talking about the detail in all of that. Meanwhile, the savings from the winter fuel allowance being scrapped have already been wiped out by the cost of housing migrants in hotels and accommodation. I'll be giving you the bombshell numbers in just a moment. And British universities, places I know very well, are increasingly dependent on income from Chinese students despite repeated calls for universities to reduce their reliance on funding linked to Beijing. And the prison minister has admitted the overwhelming influence that gangs are now having in prisons, and it's keeping him awake at night, he says, as corrupt staff and violence wreak havoc behind the bars. We're going to be talking to a top prisons expert about what is going on in our prisons. That State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, starts right now. Now, I'll also be joined tonight by my panel, senior reporter at Guido Fawkes, Ellie Wheatley, and broadcaster and neurodiversity coach Fahima Mohammed. As ever, let me know your views, gbnews.com/your say. You can, of course, reach us on X at GBNews, at GoodwinMJ. But now it's time for the News Bulletin with Sam Francis.
Matt, good evening to you. The top story just after 8 o'clock. A 31-year-old Iranian man has been arrested in northwest London under the National Security Act in the latest move by UK counter-terror police. It follows the arrest of another 3 Iranian men in the capital on Saturday, linked to the same investigation. Separately, 5 Iranian nationals were held across England over a suspected plot targeting the Israeli embassy in London. Iran's foreign minister has denied any involvement, accusing unnamed parties of trying to provoke escalation. The Met Force, though, says operational reasons prevent it from revealing any more, but is urging the public to remain vigilant. 2 men have been found guilty of cutting down the iconic Sycamore Gap tree in Northumberland. Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers caused £622,000 worth of damage to the landmark. The pair felled the tree in under 3 minutes last September. Footage, voice notes and photos found on Graham's phone helped convict them at Newcastle Crown Court today. They'll be sentenced in July for what police have called a mindless act of vandalism. A former BBC bargain hunt expert has admitted failing to report £140,000 in art sales to a man accused of financing Hezbollah. 53-year-old Achuka Ojiri pleaded guilty to 8 counts under terrorism laws, marking the first prosecution of its kind. The court heard he sold directly to Nazim Ahmad, who was sanctioned by the US and UK for links to the proscribed group. Ojiri discussed the sanctions with others and failed to act on compliance advice. He's set to be sentenced at the Old Bailey on the 6th of June. In other news, the government insists hormone-treated American beef won't enter the UK despite a new tariff deal allowing 13,000 tonnes of beef imports every year. Farmers and consumers fear it opens the door to lower quality meat, but ministers say certification and border checks will keep standards intact. The UK banned hormone-fed beef in 1989, but it is still widely used in the US to cut costs. Campaigners say border enforcement is already overstretched, though, while others are urging shoppers to stick to locally produced meat. Mexico is suing Google for showing Gulf of America instead of Gulf of Mexico on US versions of Google Maps. The Mexican president's accusing Google of ignoring requests to reverse the change, which followed a Trump executive order renaming the Gulf. The tech giant says it was simply following official US sources, but Mexico insists Washington has no authority to rename the entire body of water. The move has sparked international backlash and even triggered a month-long standoff between the White House and the Associated Press. Trump now says he may also push to rename the Persian Gulf during a visit to Saudi Arabia. And a scathing report from MPs warns the government's cyber defences are dangerously outdated. Nearly a third of public sector IT relies on vulnerable legacy systems, leaving vital services exposed. The Public Accounts Committee says urgent upgrades are needed across departments. It follows recent cyber attacks on retailers like Marks and Spencer. The government, though, has pledged £16 million to strengthen defences, calling it a wake-up call for Britain. That's the news on GB News. I'll be back with you for the very latest at 9 o'clock.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight on GB News with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, it's been a momentous week for all of us. We've honoured the sacrifices of a generation who stood against tyranny, who fought and died so that Britain could remain a free nation, a beacon of liberty, of democracy, and yes, of free speech. But as we look around today, I have to ask what many of you are asking: what have we done with that freedom? What kind of country are we becoming when reports say that a young generation no longer feels proud to be British, when only a minority say they'd be willing to fight for the country? And at the same time, when ordinary working people feel they cannot speak their minds in this country without being silenced or shamed by the ruling class. Now, Labour peer Lord Glasman has joined this debate recently by arguing that his party, the Labour Party, founded by and for the working class, has created what he calls a hostile environment for those very people. The Labour Party, Lord Glasman says, has become a space where if you speak plainly, if you voice concerns about immigration, about Brexit, about the loss of community or neighbourhood, you're no longer seen as someone in pain. Instead, you're labelled far-right, racist, sexist. We're witnessing a kind of thought policing that is chilling. Entire swathes of opinion, especially those held by the working class, are deemed unacceptable by the elites in power. We've replaced open discourse with corporate HR speak, DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion, political orthodoxy, and a culture of fear. Even historic Labour heroes like Ernest Bevin would be considered too unprogressive to stand today. Indeed, people like Clement Attlee as well, given their proud defence in the nation. This cannot go on. Britain's strength has always been in its ability to host disagreement, to tolerate dissent, to be a place where people of all classes and creeds can argue their case without fear of persecution. That's what VE Day is all about. Freedom won, freedom maintained. But we're drifting from that heritage. Lord Glasman calls for a working class insurrection, not of violence, but of voice, a reassertion of the values this country has long stood for: sovereignty, security, family, and above all, the right to speak freely, and yes, sometimes, to offend. It's time to get a grip. We need to remember that freedom of speech is not some culture war buzzword. It's the very essence of British democracy. We didn't defeat fascism just to muzzle ourselves with our own self-censorship. So on this week of remembrance and reflection, let's ask ourselves honestly, are we still a free people? Or are we just pretending to be? If the answer is the latter, then it's time we made ourselves free again, not just in law, but in culture, in politics, in media, and in everyday speech. Let's be the Britain our grandparents fought for. Well, I'm joined now by senior reporter at Guido Fawkes, Ellie Wheatley, and broadcaster and neurodiversity coach Fahima Mohammed to debate this. Fahima, Lord Glasman, Labour peer on the left of politics, coming out while his party's in government and saying, we've got a free speech problem and the Labour Party is part of that problem.
I don't think that we have a free speech problem. I think a lot of people like to generalize, delete and distort information. And I think that we have evolved as a nation where certain misinformation and misrepresentation can lead to incitement and hate, as we've seen with the riots. And it's really dangerous rhetoric that we are actually protecting. Freedom of speech is also not sort of like, away from freedom of correcting that free speech. So it coincides.
So what do you mean by that? I mean,
so we can criticize.
With
we
limits.
can criticize. No, there's no such thing as free speech completely. There's always a grey line, and there's always, that's why we have the public order. We have, certain laws in place, because there is a grey line where people do cross over, where it can lead to, like I said, incitement and hate, and it can lead to where minority groups and certain people will actually be under sort of like, more sort of scrutiny or misrepresentation. It
sounds to me, though, as though you're using, this is what Lord Glasman is perhaps suggesting, that you're using words like hate, misinformation, to perhaps delegitimise people who might be, for example, questioning the effects of mass migration on Britain, or might be
Absolutely
questioning
not.
the
You can
collapse of our borders?
No, you can definitely question whatever you need to question. But when you are using certain propaganda and rhetoric and also demonising entire communities for minority or certain sort of like limitations with certain groups of people within that.
Give me an example.
For example, when we talk about migration, when we talk about the boats, when we talk about people coming in, it's like as if to say that it's all immigrants. I just heard even earlier in one of the shows, it's like, oh, are we sort of impolite now in Britain because of migrants? I mean, is that something that we need to talk about?
So we shouldn't be allowed to say that?
It's not about not allowed to say that. It's just, it's putting everyone under one, you know, under one stroke, brushing everyone under one place if you are of a minority background. That's what it is.
I think the crucial difference here is, you know, you can say you shouldn't say that, not you can't say that. I mean, we've seen a rise in non-crime hate incidents. You know, old grannies getting the roses at the knock on the door. Obviously, Alison Pearson, that the Telegraph journalist, having the police at her door just because of a tweet that she posted about the Gaza protests. And I think, you know, that it does sort of have echoes of Orwell's thought police, which I think is right to be concerned about. With the Labour Party and immigration, I mean, I think they've realised now that actually it is such an important issue that that you actually can't be worried about being labelled a racist by talking about immigration. I mean, I'd argue there's almost too much speech from the Labour front on the small boats at the moment, not enough action. I mean, not a lot of cracking down. So I think, to be honest, that, listen, the pendulum is sort of swinging against this idea that you can't say things in case you offend someone. I think, in part, that's thanks to Trump coming in to the White House the second term. That's sort of come across.
Supreme Court ruling, for example.
Exactly. And I think at the moment, the only party that has a clean slate on this issue is obviously Reform, which is why they're doing so well in the polls, because you've got Starmer, you know, not being able to say what a woman is like 10 times, etc. So. That's why they're doing well.
So, non-crime hate incidents as an example. Ellie's saying there's a bit of a problem there in that, you know, you can have 250,000 people being given one of these non-crime hate incidents. Why do we scrap those? That's an easy way to get back to the tradition of individual liberty and free speech on these islands. There's something that should go. In fact, we've got laws from the 1980s that basically are there to protect us against racial discrimination. So why don't we scrap all hate laws from, let's say, 1997 onwards? Why do we need these attempts to control the public debate, to censor people who are trying to say entirely legitimate things like, let's stop the boats?
Are they legitimate, though? At the end of the day, I feel that when we are talking about certain things, we are definitely raising issues, but again, we are also raising sort of this political correctness of how we should and shouldn't speak, when actually it's about talking in constructive dialogue.
Okay,
it's all about
so on that,
hate.
so we can only talk about things if
there's no such thing as only and only
perceive
can't.
it as constructive dialogue. Let me give you a real-world example. If I want to say, stop the boats, I think that's an invasion, I want it stopped. Is that hate?
It's not hate, but it's actually putting, like I said, everyone as criminals.
They are criminals,
okay?
they're breaking the law.
No, they all are not.
They're
You cannot say that.
They're breaking the law.
You cannot say that.
They are literally breaking the law.
No, but at the end of the day, you cannot say that.
They're destroying their documents, they're arriving at an unauthorised port of entry. They are literally breaking the law.
I think even the government says that they are illegal migrants when they're crossing.
Well, apparently the Labour government now says they're irregular.
They are exactly.
No,
they are saying that.
But that's the new fashionable word for illegal. I guess, Rahima, what we're tapping into is this sense of frustration that people have, where you use the word misinformation, for example, after Southport. There was a lot of misinformation, as we've now discovered, from Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper. But misinformation is one of those words to me that is used to accuse people of not having the right information or the right opinions while not giving them the information they need to make a judgment about what's happening in the country. So the state is simultaneously not sharing information with people about
and then people go out and say whatever they want. And, you know, people were targeted like that, looked like me, and taken to one side so you cannot cross a certain way. These are the repercussions of saying certain things that actually incites hate. And it was actually really scary for someone like myself who's lived in this country for so many many years
Absolutely.
who actually felt like that. So, you know, at the end of the day, you have to, but that's the thing, unless you're sitting in my shoe and you can realise that. And it's the same for everyone at the end of the day. So it's not just about, you know, we shouldn't be saying, no one ever says we shouldn't be saying, but say things which is correct. But what they do, what people mainly do, is they put everyone under one stroke. Well, and it's really, really dangerous.
Who's deciding what is and what is not correct? Hold that thought, because we also saw an exclusive interview last night between Boris Johnson and Patrick Christys, and they were debating some of these issues. But I just want to show you a clip of Boris Johnson, what he said about young people today.
Do you think we are? Because a lot of people think we've gone a bit soft. A lot of people think that the younger generation, they've never had to live through anything like this. They take everything for granted.
I think the great thing about the British is, you know, famously somebody once said they lose every battle except the last, right? And, you know, I think we would come through again.
So Boris Johnson, they're saying we would come through again if there was another war, but specifically young people would come through again. Do you think that's true? Because we also had that bombshell polling recently which showed only a minority were willing to fight for Britain, and a large number of young Zoomers from Gen Z, 18 to 30s, were saying Britain is an institutionally racist country.
Well, I think in times of peace, people don't tend to say, yes, I will go up and join the army.
Compared to 20 years ago, though, Ellie, the numbers have dropped significantly.
20 years ago, maybe, but do you not remember that famous Oxford debate, this House will not fight for this country? And then, of course, most of them did end up fighting for World War II and, of course, won. So I think when it comes to it, the British Gen Z, including myself, but probably not me because I don't think I'd be very good in the army.
I've seen you behind enemy lines in Westminster.
Yeah, well, maybe not physically on the border, but yeah. So I think Boris is correct here. I think we would rise to the occasion.
Do you think young people would rise to this occasion?
Absolutely not. They're not fit. They're not able. They're not actually in line with what the foreign politics is. You see that people are constantly debating. Like I said, what we're talking about years ago is different now. Information's different, and people are seeing things differently, and they don't actually agree with what's happening. I don't see any political organisation or group that actually reflects what everyday people are actually asking for, including reform. I'm sorry.
So an example in foreign policy, what do you mean they have different opinions from what they used to?
Well, the fact that, now people are waking up as to what are the involvements of the West with regards to people, fighting in the Middle East, for example, and what are, their taxpayers' monies going in, whether it's from the United States or from the UK or Europe, in example, and which side they're taking and what's happening, and their voices are not being heard. There's marches every day on the streets, and it's not being reflected,
well,
just like how it was for the Iraq War.
But it's marches by some people, not the
it's actually quite a lot of people, including 13, Jewish organisations that have also taken part in the pro-Palestinian marches, and for the Iraq War, which again, there's no repercussions for it.
Well, we will obviously be continuing this debate. Up next, we're going to be turning a little bit to a shocking new revelation. Convicted migrants in this country could avoid deportation under some new sentencing guidelines. Meanwhile, the savings from the winter fuel allowance, remember that being taken away from British pensioners, well, apparently those savings have been wiped out by the increased cost of housing people who are breaking our laws over the next decade. I'm going to give you those bombshell numbers in just a couple of minutes.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christys Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Oh, can you tell me, please, about your time during the war? 50 bombing raids over Germany. Do you remember the first time you faced enemy fire?
Yes, very clearly. No one can tell you what it is like to be shot at. You have to experience it. And on my very first occasion, which was a raid on Hanover, we came under anti-aircraft fire. I have to tell you right from the outset that German anti-aircraft fire was very accurate, it was very lethal, and of course it was linked to radar, so they always knew where you were and where they expected you to be when the shells arrived. Well, we were naive, we were inexperienced, and as I say, nobody could tell you what it's going to be like. You have to experience it.
You must be very proud of what you did during the war and ultimately helping to save Britain from the Nazis.
Now, if you're looking for a hero, and I'm certainly not a hero, you must look at the boys that flew the heavy bombers, the Halifaxes and the Lancasters, because they flew much, much more slowly. Loaded, I think, somewhere under 200 miles an hour.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight on GB News with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, get this, new sentencing rules could be about to arrive, which will let convicted illegal migrants dodge deportation from this country. With the guidelines being slammed as lax by the Conservative Party, sentences now fall below the 12-month threshold that you need for automatic removal. Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick has said Labour is weakening, not strengthening, our borders. Indeed, just look at the latest small boat numbers. They are up considerably on the same time last year, letting hundreds of offenders stay each year. Meanwhile, a £1.6 billion, let me say that again, a £1.6 billion winter fuel cut, taking those payments off British pensioners, has now been wiped out by spiralling costs to house asylum seekers and illegal migrants, which, according to a new report this week, is going to hit £15 billion by 2029. I'm going to say that again, £15 billion by 2029. That is £4 million a day. That is enough to heat 51 million homes for pensioners. It is also, by the way, enough to build 15 brand new hospitals. Well, to discuss these mind-boggling numbers, I'm joined by Research Director of the Centre for Migration Control, a research centre I just want to add that I rate very highly. You should definitely be engaging with this research centre. Robert Bates. Robert, thank you for joining the show. You know more than most people about the numbers. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm struggling to get my head around them. £15 billion over the course of 10 years.
I think it's an incredibly insulting figure that the British taxpayer is going to have to get their head around. And of course, this figure is just for those accommodation contracts that we handed out to these large companies, some of whom, of course, were Lib Dem owners that benefited the most from this. This, of course, doesn't take into account the healthcare costs, the welfare costs, those goodies as well that are handed out to these migrants being put up in hotels. And just to give a scale to the viewers of how much this is blown out of control, in 2019, the asylum system cost us about £400 million a year. It's forecast now by the Home Office in 24-25 it's going to be costing us about £6.5 billion just for 1 year. So you really stack these numbers up and you can see why we have that black hole that Rachel Reeves is talking so much about. And of course, it's not just the winter fuel allowance that Labour have taken a really controversial decision on. It's the farm tax, it's things such as VAT on public schools as well. If you add all of those things together, it still doesn't come close to the figure, this £15 billion figure.
Can I just throw something else in too? You know, the money involved is obviously obscene, right? It's absolutely outrageous from the point of view of British taxpayers. We've also, though, just had the scandal of the British state basically bankrolling companies like Serco to outbid British people in the housing market to provide that housing, which should be going to people from this country, to people who are breaking the laws of this country. I mean, it's completely and utterly absurd.
Exactly, and you were talking in your earlier segment about Gen Z and whether they fight for this country, and perhaps a sense of disillusionment that Gen Z have with the state this country is in at the moment. It comes from the fact that they are now really paying taxes so that the government can subsidise these companies to pay landlords to effectively outbid them with asylum seekers and to house asylum seekers rather than young Brits. And this is really why the rental market probably is going to face real strain in red wall areas, and probably why we'll see a kind of reaction electorally as well.
Yeah.
The Labour Party will continue to be...
Well, even if some of the people who have come over and are taking up the housing have arrived legally, the other key point in all of this is that even the Oxford Migration Observatory, a respected research institute such as your own, similar to the Centre for Migration Control, has concluded in its recent report from December 2024 that migration is increasing house prices and driving up rents, especially in areas of the city where you tend to get more migration. So the evidence is there, Rob. This is the thing I can't understand. The evidence is there. The costs we now know about, as these numbers released over the last 2 days reflect yet again. Yet nobody in Westminster seems to be willing to acknowledge this and talk about it. Instead, we just get Keir Starmer saying, well, I'm building 1.5 million homes, what's the problem? Even though we know they're not building anywhere near enough homes that we need in order to accommodate for past demand. So just treat me like an idiot for a minute. Why is Westminster not actually being open and honest with people about this problem?
I think the reason is that Westminster is stuck in two things, really. It's stuck in lobbying interests. It's very much caught by the idea that industry needs legal migration, which is really what's driving the population explosion that has put such pressure on the housing market in recent years. It's been really caught by things such as the health and social care sector that want to shirk their obligations to actually try and invest in innovation and would rather just import cheap labour that really helps them keep down their overheads. And then, of course, we also have the fact that they are able to hide a lot of the consequences of this and blame it on things such as a lack of investment in the previous government. And there's a real tendency in politicians just to resort to short-termism, blaming their political opponents rather than taking the book and taking those big, bold decisions that the British public now, we can see time and time again with opinion polls, are screaming out for on illegal, but most importantly, legal migration.
Rob Bates from the Centre for Migration Control, thank you as always for joining us. You're a friend of the channel, we appreciate it. I'm joined now by senior reporter at Guido Fawkes, Ellie Wheatley, and broadcaster and neurodiversity coach Fahima Mohammed. Fahima, let me just start with you. There are people out there who are going to be really struggling with these numbers, 10 to 15 billion pounds over a 10-year period. Some of which, let's be frank, is going to fund accommodation for people who have broken our laws and who shouldn't be here. Why is it that British pensioners should be having their winter fuel payments taken away, and that saving is already being swallowed up by the amount we're spending on this?
Look, I think that that sort of part of funding that's going for the immigration is different. It is for sort of like charity and things like that. So that's where it's coming from.
Specifically for housing.
But even still,
and private companies who are making hundreds of millions of pounds.
But still, it's not taken away from the fuel, like you mentioned. That is separate. That is separate. What they are funding and using for the migrants is from a separate funding.
Okay, right. Okay? So they're in separate spreadsheets, but we took winter fuel payments over here to save this amount, and now we're throwing that money over there.
Absolutely, but I think the problem is not just about housing them, it's more about us addressing the fact that we need to be better at processing information, being quicker at actually making sure that, absolutely, that should actually be one of them, and no one's doing that. And not also just blaming the migrants, but actually coming down more harsher on the smugglers themselves.
Ellie, this is a big problem, right? British families, British young people looking at this. Labour apparently now are going to be aiming to build 370,000 homes a year, but we already know from credible think tanks that they really need to be building closer to 600,000 just to deal with the demand from increased migration. But these numbers too are bananas. I mean, what are the political implications of this for Labour if this doesn't change?
I mean, it's terrible optics for Labour. Let's not forget they promised to close down asylum hotels. And now they're facing, Starmer's facing growing rebellions from his own ranks. 45 MPs within the Labour Red Wall group have issued a call to action against the winter fuel cuts. And again, if this doesn't change, they are really in deep trouble. And I think Starmer as well. We've seen it in the polls. I don't think I see it changing at all because Reeves has done this huge tax and spend agenda in the budget. Economic forecasts are consistently downgraded because of her high taxes, and she's trapped herself in by wanting to stick to her fiscal rules. So I don't see a solution for them at all. And at the end of the day, the Tories mismanaged this crisis over the last 14 years. Reform's the only one with a clean slate. Whether or not they've solved the issue, who knows?
And just briefly before we move to something else, the Sentencing Council guidelines that people will be reading about have come out that suggest that migrants will be able to avoid deportation because they'll be given sentences below 12 months. Is that not going to entrench this two-tier Keir perception that people have, this two-tier system that seems to now be surrounding the Labour Party?
And let's not forget that Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood did actually enact emergency legislation when Robert Jenrick raised the issue of two-tier sentencing, the first instance when it was about ethnic minorities being able to avoid jail more easily. So it is possible. They're not doing that now. And so I think you're right. It definitely does entrench the idea of two-tier Keir if he doesn't do something about this.
Fahima, what's going to happen here with the two-tier perception of Labour now being entrenched by, again, a scandal over sentencing guidelines?
Well, the Ministry of Justice has actually clarified that it's not going to actually basically not deport these kind of immigrants if they are less than 12 months or whatever it may be. It's there to enforce justice and fairness proportionately, not about just deportation. So that is not a get out of free card. At the end of the day, they can still be deported. That is misinformation that you've just said right now. The Ministry of Justice has actually clarified that they can be deported regardless.
Everything that you don't like is not misinformation. This is
It's not because I don't like it.
I've got a right of reply right here.
It's not about not liking it.
I've got a right of reply right here. On costs, a Home Office spokesman says this. As the report shows, we inherited... Can I finish reading this statement on my show? Thank you. As the report shows, we inherited an asylum system in chaos with tens of thousands stuck in a backlog, claims not being processed and disastrous contracts that were wasting millions in taxpayers' money. We've taken immediate action to fix it, increasing asylum decision-making by 52% and removing 24,000 people with no right to be here, meaning there are now fewer asylum hotels open than since the election. By restoring our grip on the system and speeding up decision-making, we will end the use of hotels and are forecast to save the taxpayer £4 billion by the end of 2026. The Sentencing Council defended the guidelines, saying that they proposed higher sentences for the most serious offending behaviours while maintaining current sentencing practices for less serious offending. They say the guidelines as a whole are designed to cover the full range of offending from the least to the most serious while leaving headroom for the very most extreme offences, according to a spokesman. Judges and magistrates can sentence outside guidelines, if they feel it is in the interest of justice to do so. Well, the debate will carry on, and after the break, our debate will carry on as we turn to the higher education sector, where we ask the question, are British universities becoming too dependent upon income from Chinese students?
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you're thinking of heading south for a holiday, it is going to be very unsettled across Madeira and Iberia. Fairly blustery through the Greek islands, but some sunny spells in between any showers. A few showers for Italy, but mostly fine here. Likewise for Sardinia, but across Spain, Portugal and France, increasingly spells of heavy thundery rain. Likewise, we'll see some blustery showers affecting Madeira. It does settle down here over the next few days.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Good evening, this is your Met Office weather update for GB News. Plenty more fine weather to come as we go through this weekend, some warm sunshine too, but do be aware there is the risk of some thunder, particularly in the southwest on Sunday. Currently the high pressure, which has dominated our weather through much of this week, still across us, but it's drifting away towards the east. As a result, a front towards the northwest is going to edge a little bit closer to us, but it's not going to make much progress overnight. It's really just going to bring a bit more cloud, perhaps a few spots of rain to the far northwest of Scotland. Otherwise, it's looking dry and there will be largely clear skies, mostly light winds as well. As a result, it could turn a bit fresh for some of us overnight. Some countryside spots could dip close to freezing, most places staying above this, but it is going to be quite fresh first thing tomorrow morning, and there could even be a few pockets of mist and fog around. But these will quite quickly clear. Once the sun gets up, it's going to burn any of those away, and it's also going to quite quickly lift our temperatures, so starting to turn increasingly warm as we go through the morning. Like I said though, there is that front towards the far northwest that could bring a bit more cloud and a few spots of rain to the northwest of Scotland, but otherwise a fine morning and a fine afternoon for most. Lots of sunshine on offer, lots of blue skies, and in that sunshine it's going to feel pretty warm for most. Temperatures, if anything, a few degrees warmer than today. We're likely to get to highs in the high teens, low 20s quite widely, and some places getting into the mid-20s Celsius. But do be aware, like I said, there's the risk of some thunderstorms pushing in from the southwest. These are going to arrive as we go through Saturday evening and become a bit more widespread as we go into Sunday. Bit of uncertainty at the moment as to how widespread they're going to be, so they could push across more parts of southern southwestern England into Wales, perhaps the Midlands and Northern Ireland as well. Otherwise, and there's actually a lot of dry, fine weather around as we go through Sunday and into Monday and Tuesday, but just a few showers to be aware of.
Westminster, the ultimate clique. And you're fighting like rats in a sack. But here on the Camilla Tominey Show, we ask the questions the establishment media is too scared to ask. OK, let me ask you a straight question, because I know you're a straight-talking politician. Whether it's net zero, illegal immigration or law and order, nothing is off limits. You had the power then.
Yeah, as I
and
say,
now you've lost it. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show that's fearless. But no, let me finish my question if you don't mind, because it is my show. Sundays at 9:30, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
No matter the state it's in, this is our nation. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for a genuine, honest discussion on where we have been, where we are going, and where we are with the people who set the direction. That's State of the Nation every Monday and Tuesday at 8 o'clock, only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight on GB News with me, Matt Goodwin. British universities are increasingly dependent on income from Chinese students. If you just look at the numbers, that becomes increasingly clear. Well, despite repeated calls for universities to reduce their reliance on this funding linked to Beijing, it does appear to be increasing over time. British universities it raises very big questions for the university sector. If you look at the figures from 2023 to 24 in that financial year, it shows that at some institutions, I mean, this is shocking, nearly 1/3 of all revenue is coming from this single international market. At the Royal College of Art, Chinese students make up 45% of the student body last year, with their tuition fees estimated to account for 37% of the university's total income. This despite repeated calls for universities to reduce their reliance on funding linked to Beijing. So are British universities becoming too reliant on Chinese students? To discuss this, I'm pleased to welcome CEO of Hong Kong Watch, Benedict Rogers. Benedict, thank you for joining us tonight. I was in the universities myself, as of course you may know, for 20 years. I saw the expansion of the international student market firsthand, especially the expansion of the so-called China market, especially in the elite institutions. Oxbridge, Russell Group and so on. And it seemed pretty clear to me that universities were using this as a crucial source of revenue while perhaps turning a blind eye to some of the moral and ethical dilemmas of becoming so dependent upon a regime like the regime that China has.
Absolutely. Well, you've just summed up exactly the dangers. Let me be clear. I don't want to stop Chinese students from benefiting from a liberal Western democratic education, but the over-reliance on one particular source of income, particularly when we know that the Chinese Communist Party uses its students, often forces its students to engage in activities that undermine academic freedom, threaten freedom of expression, and are part of its transnational repression campaign. That over-reliance is extremely dangerous. So I think we should
Benedict, sorry, can I just ask you what kinds of activities, for people who are not familiar with universities, that you might be referring to? Because academic freedom, for somebody who works in universities, is absolutely critical. Academic freedom is the ability of professors and others to say whatever they want to say without fear of any negative repercussions. Free speech, obviously, is that critical foundation to encouraging good faith debate on campus. So how are the growing numbers of Chinese students in the higher education sector potentially undermining those things?
Well, let me give you one very concrete example, but this is illustrative of many more cases. The case of Professor Michelle Shipworth, who's a lecturer at University College London. A whole module of her course was withdrawn because Chinese students complained that she was talking about, with evidence, the existence of modern-day slavery in China, particularly in the prison camps in Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, the use of forced labor in supply chains. And her module was withdrawn because UCL said we're too dependent on Chinese funding to be able to afford the luxury of her saying what she said. That's just one example. There are also many cases of Chinese students harassing other Chinese students who may be critical of the regime, or indeed Hong Kongers, Tibetans and Uyghurs, and that's gone on our campuses for far too long.
Well, what about those who say, Benedict, well, look, actually, in a country in which many universities are now basically on the verge of bankruptcy, the business model is not really viable. We've got, I mean, probably half a dozen universities, if you read the newspapers, that are pretty much going bust as we speak. What about the argument that actually we need the international student income to keep the business model of modern universities afloat?
Well, I totally understand that argument, but the point is we need the international student body, not one particular country's student body. So we should be diversifying the market for overseas students. We should be attracting more students from India, from other Asian countries, from across the world. And let me be clear, I'm not saying we should stop Chinese students from coming. We just shouldn't be reliant on them. I think we also probably would do well to do better background checks on Chinese students so that those with particular affiliation to the Chinese Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army, and particularly those students coming into disciplines where we may be unwittingly transferring knowledge in the sciences and technology, for example, we should be perhaps limiting those. But the main issue is we should be diversifying and not being reliant on China.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's definitely a debate that's going to carry on. If I could just quickly ask you about one thing. These Confucius institutes that you read a lot about in the newspapers, these sort of research institutes that are dedicated to studying China politics, Chinese economy, whatever, expanding the understanding of China. There's been a lot of discussion in the press about those being a particular problem. If I could just briefly get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, they are definitely a problem. They have a requirement for their staff to avoid and indeed prevent discussion from sensitive issues, particularly the three T's, Tiananmen, Tibet and Taiwan. And they pose as teaching Chinese language and culture, and I'm all for more students learning Chinese language and culture. but they should be able to do so without political interference.
Well, Benedict, thank you for joining us tonight. Incredibly interesting stuff. Now, up next, the prisons minister has admitted the overwhelming influence that gangs are having in UK prisons, and he says it keeps him awake at night. And we're going to be talking to a prisons expert in just a couple of minutes about what on earth is going on in our prisons. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays, I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions. But every Friday night at 9 p.m, you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave. I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Tonight. State of the Nation. A big one now. Our prisons are under siege from within. Organised criminal gangs are corrupting staff, smuggling in drugs and enforcing debt with violence. Prisons Minister James Timpson has said the crisis is so serious it is keeping him up at night. A beefed-up anti-corruption unit is cracking down, but with jails overcrowded, Victorian buildings crumbling and criminals running empires from their cells, the pressure is mounting. I wanted to talk specifically about this story today because I don't think it gets enough attention, and I'm joined by National Chairman of the Prison Officers Association, Mark Fairhurst. Mark, thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Look, Mark, we're reading a lot about these gangs. We're reading a lot about prisons not being safe for staff, for other inmates. We're hearing about prisoners being forced to join extremist organisations in prisons. Can you just give our viewers and listeners tonight a sense as to what is really going on?
Yeah, sure. Good evening. So it's nothing new in prisons. We've always had gangs. The difference now is there are more of them, the better organised and the more resourceful. So they have the capability now of organising things from inside to continue The only way we're going to combat that is if the prisons minister, who's staying awake every night worrying about us, gives us the investment and the resources to disrupt that activity.
Yeah, Mark, so more resources, more support, that will help prison officers and staff disrupt the gangs. What gangs are we talking about? Just treat me like somebody that doesn't know anything about prison life. I mean, what's their ideology? What kind of creed do they follow? I mean, just give me a sense of what are we talking about here?
So, in the main, we are talking about these major organised criminal gangs that receive large sentences when they are eventually caught and incarcerated, who continue with their criminal empire whilst they're inside. So what they will do all too often is they will get hold of a mobile phone. They will organise from inside their jail cell a delivery of illicit items via drone, and then they will distribute it with runners inside to carry on their criminal empire. And of course, when prisoners purchase drugs on credit and can't pay it back, that usually ends in a violent incident. So what I can't understand is, we know what the issue is, we know what causes the issue, so why can't we invest in technology to prevent it? We know there are technological advances out there that can block drone signals so we can secure our airspace, and we already know that mobile phone blockers exist. So why aren't we investing in introducing technology into our prisons?
I mean, I'm just sat here thinking, how on earth are drones getting into prisons? I mean, it's 2025. It all seems a bit ridiculous and unbelievable. Can I just ask you as well briefly, lastly, I've been reading a lot in the papers about Islamist gangs in prisons with people having to be kept separate in fear of sort of forced conversion, etc. Do we need to perhaps upskill, uptrain staff with regards to that? Or how can the government better support prisons in tackling that specific dilemma?
Yeah, I think there's two facets to that particular problem. Training is a massive issue. We feel that the initial training for new recruits is totally unfit for purpose and doesn't prepare them for life on the landings. You know, you've got a lot of young and experienced staff who are getting conditioned by experienced prisoners because they're being set up to fail by the employer because of the lack of fit for purpose training. So that's one issue. And of course, the other issue is we know who the big players are inside our jails. We know what they're up to. So why don't we separate them? Why don't we open special units where we can put all these top gangsters who we know are leading the life of violence inside and making life a misery for dozens of prisoners? Why don't we just separate them from normal location, control and contain them, and get them away from everybody so we can restore order and control? It's not rocket science.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark, for joining us tonight. I'm just going to quickly turn to my panel to get their thoughts. Ellie Wheatley, prisons, to me, look like they're completely out of control. It's not just the gangs. It's also, we've heard, you know, we've had stories about staff having liaisons with inmates. We've heard about this growing problem with Islamism within prisons. I mean, what's your sense as to how high is this on the government agenda? You're spending a lot of time in Westminster. I mean, what's the...
Well, to be fair, you don't really hear many ministers speaking about it, other than obviously James Timpson, Lord Timpson. But you know, the other day he was saying that there's only around 500 spaces on for the male estate, and what's going to happen next is, you know, thousands of criminals will be released again on the streets.
Fahima, what is the answer here? More support, more resources, more money? What's your view?
I think it's a combination. There's different factors. I watched the other day the episode of Ones with Prison Inside, and they did actually address all of these issues. And it is about training. It's about higher pay. They're only joining these gangs as well is because they're actually on minimum wage when they should be more. There's no mental health for them as well because there is such limited staff and they're dealing with so many criminals and they're very young and they're very inexperienced. So everything that was said, definitely we need to have much more training, much more investment in technology, and it's really every factor that you can think of that needs to be put into that.
He's also just announced a new bullying and harassment unit, by the way, a new team to work with unions to help staff with complaints about bullying and harassment.
We will see what happens going forward. We are unfortunately out of time for now. Now, coming up next tonight is Patrick Christys after that bombshell interview last night with Boris Johnson, which I found absolutely fascinating for lots of different reasons. But Patrick, what have you got coming up tonight?
Well, hello and welcome to my live studio audience. Yes, we have got a full house tonight. I, for one, cannot wait to get stuck into the full bingo card of topics that we've got here. BBC bargain hunt star is bailed after, well, getting involved with Hezbollah. What on earth is going on there? Has the Prime Minister sold out Britain's farmers? Are we prioritising illegal migrants over pensioners? And can anyone stop reform? I'm not sure they can. Stay tuned.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. This is your Met Office weather update for GB News. Plenty more fine weather to come as we go through this weekend, some warm sunshine too, but do be aware there is the risk of some thunder, particularly in the southwest on Sunday. Currently, the high pressure, which has dominated our weather through much of this week, still across us, but it's drifting away towards the east. As a result, a front towards the northwest is going to edge a little bit closer to us, but it's not going to make much progress overnight. It's really just going to bring a bit more cloud, perhaps a few spots of rain to the far northwest of Scotland. Otherwise, it's looking dry and there will be largely clear skies, mostly light winds as well. As a result, it could turn a bit fresh for some of us overnight. Some countryside spots could dip close to freezing, most places staying above this, but it is going to be quite fresh first thing tomorrow morning, and there could even be a few pockets of mist and fog around. But these will quite quickly clear. Once the sun gets up, it's going to burn any of those away, and it's also going to quite quickly lift our temperatures, so starting to turn increasingly warm as we go through the morning. Like I said though, there is that front towards the far northwest that could bring a bit more cloud and a few spots of rain to the northwest of Scotland, but otherwise a fine morning and a fine afternoon for most. Lots of sunshine on offer, lots of blue skies, and in that sunshine it's going to feel pretty warm for most. Temperatures, if anything, a few degrees warmer than today. We're likely to get to highs in the high teens, low 20s quite widely, and some places getting into the mid 20s Celsius. But do be aware, like I said, there's a risk of some thunderstorms pushing in from the southwest. These are going to arrive as we go through Saturday evening and become a bit more widespread as we go into Sunday. Bit of uncertainty at the moment as to how widespread they're going to be, so they could push across more parts of southern southwestern England into Wales, perhaps the Midlands and Northern Ireland as well. Otherwise, and there's actually a lot of dry, fine weather around as we go through Sunday and into Monday and Tuesday, but just a few showers to be aware of.
A positive outlook through the night will power through to a bright day ahead. Boxed Home Battery Storage, sponsors of weather on GB News.